Hi guys, thank you very much for joining us. For those of you who don't know me, my name is Peter Llewellyn. I run the services at medcommsnetworking.com. There's information, there's resources, there's activities for the global medcoms community, by which I'm talking people who work in and around medical communications, medical education, medical publishing, and so on. You'll find lots of information at medcommsnetworking.com and signposts and resources and so on. Importantly, we're running these webinars every Wednesday now. And building up a great collection of video content, which is all collected together either on the MedComms YouTube channel or on NetworkPharma TV, where you'll now find 250 plus videos, many of which are a bit like this. So all sorts of topics are covered. So please do come, if you haven't seen it before, come and have an explore of what we're doing. Today, I'm absolutely delighted. We've got Jayne Packham talking about the forthcoming ABPI Code of Practice. And we're going to have a presentation from Jayne and a Q&A session. And I'd basically just like to hand over to Jayne and let you share your slides. Thank you very much. Over to you,
Brilliant.
Jayne.
Thank you so much. I'm so pleased to be here. Let me just share these. Just give me a quick nod when that's all coming through loud and clear. Is that looking happy in terms of sharing? Yes, brilliant, fantastic. Well, Peter, thank you so much. I am so excited to be here for this MedComms networking session. Here we are, 18th of November, Christmas is on its way, and to talk about the new 2021 UK ABPI Code of Practice coming through. So, as a lot of you will know, this is a bit of my mastermind subject, but just in case you've never met me before, face to face or virtually, there's a little snippet about me. I've been in the industry, oh gosh, it's 31 years now. Started in sales, moved across to MedInfo, and then sort of moved into management. But as I was in those roles, then I'm afraid the code has always been at my heart, whether it's been reviewing or implementing and things. And now for the last 20-ish years, I've been working with lots of pharma companies, lots of agencies and things, doing all sorts of different code of training, sort of online, face-to-face. And if you want to reach out to me, link in with me, then there are some contacts there. But look, more importantly, what is on the agenda today? Well, I'm going to look at three things. First of all, I just want to set a bit of a background as to why have we got a new code. We don't always have one every year. So, what's triggered at this time? I want to update you on the timings because that's critical that you know as to how is this running. And then I just want to go through some of the key changes that are coming through and give you a bit of a feel as to what I think the impact is going to be for you in your community. So let's go back to basics and say, well, why have we suddenly got a new code which is coming through in 2021? Now, I've seen that a lot of you are from all over the world, so you may well be aware that we've got this sort of cascade of codes which comes through. We've got an international code. Everything in that has to be incorporated into a European code, which is the FPA code. And then from that, if we focus just on Europe, then you have these individual country codes, and of course the UK ABPI being one of those. So what's changed is that back, it seems a long time ago now, 1st of January 2019, we had a new international code. Now, there weren't too many changes that impacted on the UK, but then FPA decided a bit later on, end of the summer last year, to update their code. And they made some really, really big steps. There were 3 separate codes, one for healthcare professionals, one for patient organisations, and one was about disclosure and transfer of value. And they took the big step of putting those all in together as one code. And at the same time, they did everything far more principle based. So because of that, what we've decided to do in the UK, I use the royal we, this is what the ABPI in the UK have decided to do, working with the PMCPA. They have decided to basically incorporate all those changes. They have no choice. They have to do it by the end of June of 2021. But at the same time, they've decided to incorporate everything, future-proof everything, again, make it more principles-based. And then whilst they're at it, they've decided to tidy a lot of text. And this is the big one. They have shuffled the whole of the code around. So this code coming through in 2021 is going to have a very, very different look and feel, which is going to be challenging for some of us, relearning clause numbers. Now, in terms of the timings, here's the roadmap, and this is a little bit of a moving feast. We had a consultation. We've then got to the point now where the PMCPA are reviewing all the comments. They're making a few tweaks on the proposals. It then has to go through to the ABPI board for approval. Now, this was planned for December, but it's actually been shifted back a month-ish, and that will then happen in January of next year. And then this is the important one. The PMCPA have committed that by the end of January next year, we will have the new shiny code. You and your clients then have 6 months, 5 months, but basically by the 1st of July 2021, that new code then comes into force. And if you're used to these sort of transitions of codes, just be aware that there's no transition. The 2019 code will stop, the new one will start, so we've not got this grace period. But what I absolutely just want to stress at this stage is just, I'm going to share with you the key proposals, and just be aware that these changes are absolutely still in draft at the moment. So just like you, I am waiting with bated breath for the late January present that comes through in 2021, and then we'll know for definite as to what changes there will be. But I think it's good just to have it on your horizon and unpick and start to think about, what the changes may imply for you and your organisation. Now, without doubt, the biggest question that you probably want to know is what colour is it going to be? I'm wondering whether it's a bit of a pink. I'm wondering whether to take a wager on it and stuff, but this is a closely guarded secret. But share your views if you have a bit of a hunch as to what colour we're going to. But let me get into the detail as to what are the key proposals looking like at the moment. Well, I think there's 5 big ones there. I've mentioned this idea of structure, so have it on your radar that virtually every clause is going to be renumbered. So those of you that have been working with it for ages, boy, we have a lot of time and we will need a lot of time to get to grips with this. Be aware that some of the scope is broadening, so it's becoming a more comprehensive code on activities. We've got a lot more definitions which have been added, and so it's always going to be important that we go back and check what does it say about patient organisations or patient representatives, which is a new one coming through. The area of partnerships, collaboration, this is where the big changes are. So I'll go into that in a little bit more detail. Grants, donations, collaboration, and we've got a new term. A lot of you will be familiar with the idea of consultancy services. If you're commissioning speakers, healthcare professionals to do writing, that type of thing. That is now going to be called contracted services. And then we've got transfer of value. But I just at this point want to say that if you happen ever to be doing anything in your role, which is more on the promotional side, there are actually minimal changes to the proposals so far. So if you're ever involved in prescribing information, adverts, information claims, that's still a big part of writing and things and meetings, then fortunately the changes there are quite minimal. There are a few, but it's not the big ones. So I would say at this point, the big stuff is that there are going to be masses of policy and SOP changes within industry. So you need to think about that, whether they impact on you. And I think the big thing is about learning a whole new vocab, so we are totally aligned with everything in the new code coming forwards. So this is just an overview of the new structure of the code. Now then, the PMCPA, I don't believe have had any comments on the colour scheme and stuff, but what I want you to be aware is that now, instead of it being almost a topic-based approach in the old code, they're now taking it into an audience-focused code. So we've got some principles, we've got overarching requirements in a grey section that applies to everything that we do. And then it's a case of thinking as to, right, my activity, who am I targeting, and then picking the right colour coordinated section. And then right down at the bottom, transfer of value is in section 7 there. And just to give you a bit of a heads up and a feel as to, well, where are things ending up? As you can see, everything is going all over the shop. Clause 2, the naughty clause, stays at clause 2, but then virtually everything else is being renumbered. Stuff is coming out of the supplementary information into the main clause. It's going out of the main clause into supplementary information, so it's turned its head completely upside down. I mentioned that the scope in some cases have broadened, and this is just one that I want you to have firmly on your radar. Now, it's always been a principle that the code covers activities of third parties, and so if you're in a supporting agency or a role, then that's going to be you guys. But now they've absolutely pulled this into the proposal, and they've just given us a few more examples. I put them in bold there just to make clear that third party, and so the scope of the code covers media buyers, providers of services related to events, so events organisers, and also public relations services as well. So you in those roles absolutely come under jurisdiction of the scope of the code. So I think my hunch is that companies are going to be employing far more scrutiny of third parties. They'll be checking what relationships, what contracts have we got in place. And I wouldn't be at all surprised if whilst they're at it, they will be knocking on doors and saying, right, we work with you. Can you please give us proof that you've been trained in the code? So that's a bit of a hunch coming through. There's also just one about patient organisations, if you're ever doing any work with them. And it's acknowledging that we've got a new definition there that can also include caregivers. And we now have a new term for patient organisation representatives. So just watch out for some of these new terms that are coming through. But I think one of the really, really big ones is this idea of, sort of collaboration, or working with others is probably a bit better phrase. Now then, some of these may apply to you, and it would definitely depend just what your scope of your role is, the scope of your agency is. Some of you may have nothing to do with any of these, maybe apart from the contracted services. And I'll take you through some of these in a little bit of detail, but what we're seeing here is mass terminology changes. And so this is where you need to realign the words that you're using. So you may be familiar with the term MEGS, a medical and educational goods and service. This could have been a therapy review, something like this. That is now going forward to be classed as a donation and a grant. And this could also be something that you could give to a patient organisation. Collaborative working is a new phrase for the UK. We always had joint working, but now they're saying that joint working is a subset of that bigger term collaboration. And again, I'll give you a few more pointers. Then we've got a couple of new ones, sponsorship and support. And then I'll finish off with just a few words about the contracted services, which will be coming through there. So the sponsorship and support is one where I think you definitely need to think about aligning your language. If I start with the support at the bottom, then support is now the new term that you would use if a company wished to support a healthcare professional or an other relevant decision maker, and maybe give them some financial support to attend an event or a meeting as a delegate. So whereas before people used to say, we've got a grants panel to sponsor this individual to go to a meeting, that is now going to sound completely different. You'd now be assessing this person to give them support, and it's no longer a meeting, that is being reworded as an event. And whilst at times I'm being really picky on the wording, I just think it's so important that we always speak the same language so that there's absolutely no scope for confusion. Is this support? Is this a sponsorship? Is this a donation? Because sometimes it's those little comments in emails or in a proposal that can trip people up and could end up in a code breach. We need complete clarity. The sponsorship there it's all about sponsorship of certain organisations. So of course you can still, as a client, a pharma company, sponsor an event and a meeting for a patient organisation or for a third party organisation. And at that, it may be that there is a promotional session where they are talking specifically about a medicine. So there's no change to that really, but there's a change in terminology. If we unpick just the donations and grants and the collaborative working and joint working, well, donations and grants. First of all, what do we mean by that? Well, the code is saying that donations are going to be physical items, services and benefits in kinds. The grants are very much the provision of funds. And if you were ever involved in one of these MEGS things, then it's most likely, I think, to end up as a donation and grant. But you know what? The devil will be in the detail, and it really depends, and it's up to the client to rework this code to figure out where does it now lie with the new definitions. Because back in the current 2019 code, MEGs were all about enhancing patient care, benefiting the NHS, so very specific on the NHS, and maintaining patient care. But now what they're going to do is they're saying that it's funds, benefits in kind or services freely given, and then they've broadened the scope a little and made it a bit clearer for supporting healthcare, scientific research or education. That word education has finally made an appearance in the code. But there's some important caveats there, that there are no requirements, there's no obligations on the recipient, and the company must not expect a benefit in return for that. So I think the key points here is that the scope is a bit broader. This is not just about healthcare organisations and the NHS. This could be a donation and grant to a patient organisation, third party, but it's absolutely not to an individual. It can be prospective. Certification, so that massive job within pharma to get everything signed off, approved, it's staying here as well. Now, if we try and contrast that with collaborative working, so this is this new broad term, then collaborative working was always about benefiting patients, but again, they've changed this and we're moving away from just the definition of joint working. And they're saying that collaborative working can be about enhancing patient care or for the benefit of patients, or alternatively, it benefits the NHS and as a minimum maintain patient care. So they've just changed things just slightly, and I think, and hearing what industry is saying, and please feel free to chip in, I think this broader scope actually gives companies more scope for collaborative projects outside of the NHS. Joint working still stays, so as you can still continue to do that, providing patients are truly benefiting from that initiative. There's a bit of confusion around certification, so I'll keep it simple and say that some materials need to be certified. And again, any benefit from this, it's not a personal thing. This is all about organisations. And then the final one, which I think is more likely to cross your paths, is that idea about consultancy services. Well, that term is now going, so we've got to retrain ourselves to talk about contracted services. And where it stands currently in the code is that these consultancy services were only specified to be with healthcare professionals and other relevant decision makers or patient organisations. They're now proposing to broaden that. And I've put some bold in here. And the big change really, it's now being not only pushed out to patient organisations, but also individual patients who are representing that organisation. If you were to contract them, they would fall under the scope of new clause 24. Plus, here is the big new one, I think. They're broadening the scope to include members of the public. And so if you were ever to have a contract with a patient or a journalist, so this could be for a meeting, could be chairing, coming to an advisory board meeting, something like that, then they will fall under the scope of a contracted service. And what I've heard is that they're likely, it's not yet been confirmed, but they are likely to make specific reference to individuals who are writing articles or are, involved in publications. That sort of scope would also fall under this contracted service. Now, I think most people presume that anyway, but that detail has now been added in. So I think the key points of this change really are that I think it's great actually. It's acknowledging that it's not just about healthcare professionals and other relevant decision makers. You know, the scope of industry is way, way beyond that. But I think one as well to have on your radar, because you are now contracting potentially with patients, journalists, this then has a knock-on implication for disclosure. So any fees directly or indirectly which are paid from industry need to be disclosed. And so what they're saying for these payments that may be made to members of the public or these journalists, that they need to be disclosed annually. They need to be disclosed in aggregate. So we're not looking for, you know, £5,000 was paid for Mrs. Smith. It would be just a lump sum. And I flag this because if you are involved in those payments at all, you may well be key in tracking some of this information for pharma. So I wouldn't be surprised if some of you will need to, you know, collate more information to allow pharma companies to disclose it. Okay. Finally, what's not been added? Okay, there are some things that people were hoping would go in there. Well, I've got three big things to mention. A lot of you I know were saying, please put into the code things about digital, social media, virtual events. There is virtually nothing, a casual mention in the code, but I just want to flag that if you're looking for guidance on digital, there was an annex added to the ABPI code, which gives some pointers. There is also a virtual events guidance document, which I'll give you a link to in just a moment. But there's no changes to prescribing information on the promotional side, and we don't have a specific section about medical educational services, which is in ABPI. So if you're doing any materials or maybe any meetings which fall into that sort of remit, then the PMCP are saying you've just got to take the same sort of code principles. A med-ed meeting would fall broadly under the meetings clause. So just take the same high principles and high standards and adopt that. And they say that every meeting must have an educational content. That's always the starting point. And so for that reason, they don't think it warrants, at this stage in the proposal, you know, an addition of a separate area. So there is your link to your digital meeting guidance. There's a document there. If you've not seen it, do have a look because it's a useful sort of pragmatic guide. I'm happy to take any questions on that one if needs be. And as a final sum up, so I think the big things, just be aware of this major restructuring and the knock-on that it's going to have, particularly policies, definitions and scope. And I would say just maybe start to think about what projects are you working on? Where do they fit in this new code? What are they going to be badged at? I wouldn't expect you to do that in isolation. So I would plan definitely for some client discussions and start that dialogue as well, as early as you can. And then it's that idea of aligning your language and principles to save confusion later on. So that is your quick whiz through. Peter, back to you.
Great, thank you very much. Speaking as someone who's not directly working with MedComms and the code, it's a slightly scary thing every time I do hear a presentation about the code and the admin that's coming with it and so on. And the new language and so on is fascinating me. Just a few things to cover off before we start the Q&A. We've got a quarter of an hour, which is great, of sort of Q&A. Those of you in the audience at the moment, please do use either the chat box or the Q&A box to send in comments, observations, and questions, okay? And we'll deal with as many as we can. And I will say this at the moment, there's been several questions about can we get access to slides and so on. All being well, this is being recorded and the video will be up on NetworkPharma TV later on, so that's okay. And we can share some of the links and so on. So there'll be opportunity to get back to all of that. Can I just jump straight in? inevitably there's a certain amount of jargon being used and so on. One question came in very early on from Jayne about the MCPA, and forgive me, I don't think I missed it. But can you just, because there's always a little bit of confusion over ABPI code, PMCPA, what the relevant association with is, and what does PMCPA? Can you just address that question? Because I do think we just glossed over that at the beginning.
Yes, yes. So the ABPI, so the Association of the British Pharmaceutical Industry, they're almost like the trade association of sort of ethical, i.e. prescription-only medicines companies within the UK. When you look at the code, yeah, there is massive confusion. Here's my red shiny one. It's fondly known as ABPI code. They badge it. But in terms of, the detail and where to find information and code cases, it's run by the PMCPA, so the Prescription Medicines Code of Practice Authority. They work incredibly closely together. They also work, of course, really closely with the UK regulator, the MHRA, and they also have links with FPIA. So hopefully everything should be aligned.
Excellent, thanks. Okay, we are getting some questions coming in. So I'm going to try and facilitate this conversation, but Jayne is going to pick up and run with what's important. The colour question, I'm sure, will be debated for a long time and has already provoked a lot of comments. So I wait to see what happens with that one. Couple of questions. Again, I'm starting with some obvious ones. Mark's asking, is the new terminology aligned with FPIA and the other national guidelines? Again, you said it's IFPA, it's FPIA, it's UK, and the other European codes are being, how aligned are they all in terms of language and so on?
Yeah, so it's a great question. And when you look at some of the definitions, so some of the definitions in the proposed UK code are totally aligned with FPIA, but you know what? Some aren't. So it's all taking the same principles. So the principles in FPIA must be carried through. But if you're looking for a global document where you can have, this is the word, this is the definition, it's not looking as simple as that at the moment, I'm afraid.
Okay, and again, I was stating the obvious, but a lot of the people watching this or are working on global campaigns, they're working on global activity. So you've got this clash all the time of different codes, haven't you? Do you want to can you just say a few words and give people a sense, if they're not in the middle of it, they might not fully understand the implications of that?
Yeah, so it is a real challenging one, really. And if you're working on a global campaign, then I think the starting point is really to have a chat with your client and pose to them, do they have a gold standard code that they would like all their materials to adhere to in the first instance for that global document? Now, I know that quite a lot of companies do take the UK code. It's such a picky one. So there's a lot of thoughts out there. If it gets through the UK and meets UK standards, then you're pretty much home and dry in a big percentage. So talk to the client, number one, is what I would say. But really, there is no getting away from the fact that once you've done a global material, when it then gets to a national country level, then that country will need to scrutinise it in depth. They will need to approve it against their country code to make sure it's totally code compliant. If it's a meeting, this is a real challenging one as well. And I would just say, just work with your clients. Some of them have fabulous spreadsheets which will actually detail, right, this is what the German code says, this is what the Swiss code says, because unpicking the subtle differences it's a challenge. It really is. So I'd say take the lead from the client if at all possible, but you may well be dipping in and out of different codes at different times.
I'm going to be careful with this point, but it's worth saying, facing up to the fact we're talking in November 2020, and we're all under COVID restrictions, the rest of it. So meetings, as we used to know them, aren't really happening at the moment. But let's just go with this for a moment, and just to pursue that point that you've been touching on, in a meeting scenario where you've got people from different countries meeting at a meeting, exhibition stands and so on. As I say, it's a while since I've had to deal with the details of this, but I guess you're still having to face up to the fact that somebody from one country and someone from the other country can't do the same thing when they hit your stand. Is it still, you can have a cup of coffee, you can't have a coffee, sort of thing. Again, I just want a bit of a sense of that, and then maybe we can talk a bit about the new world. But in meeting situations, it all comes together. there are clashes, aren't there, that happen on a practical level.
Yeah, absolutely, absolutely. And so, if, yes, we roll the clock back to when it was face to face. Yes, definitely, you need to sort of juggle multiple codes, and it comes down to almost that transfer of value, that disclosure aspect, and then of course, sort of local laws as well. So some states in America, you know, you could have a cup of coffee on a stand, others you can't. We're not quite as prescriptive in the UK, for example, and across most of Europe. France is a bit quirky on it and things. But yeah, when we then look at virtual, and I've sort of mentioned, and thank you for putting that link into the chat for folks. So we've got this sort of, you know, guidance document that's come out here. Even though we've gone virtual, you know, in all meetings, it still actually does talk about hospitality, amazingly. And it's saying in there that, you know, you wouldn't be able to have a hospitality for a virtual meeting for one individual, but it's saying as a suggestion that if you had a group of healthcare professionals in a virtual meeting, then maybe you could provide hospitality, you know, and get somebody to deliver the sandwich lunch to folks if they're there in a group. But we can't have, you know, just lots of single cups of coffee being delivered all around the world. That is what they're suggesting in terms of the hospitality.
I mean, one's brain starts to do a few somersaults at that sort of point. And just again, to clarify, and correct me very fast if I'm wrong on this one, but that guidance document was FPA, IFPA. It wasn't ABPI, is that right?
No, so it's a combination.
So my question was, are the ABPI supporting that guidance document? It wasn't in their name, sort of thing. And it was in July that it was published. And
Yeah.
5 months is a long time in the COVID era, sort of thing. So I just wonder, as I say, whether the ABPI is making any sort of reference to it, or any, you know, or what? How does it work in real life again?
Yeah,
Bearing
so
in mind some of what they said was a bit difficult to see in real life, like your
yeah.
cups of coffee going.
So if I take it back a step, so even though that document is badged under FPA, it was actually a collaboration between FPA, the international code, and also the US Pharma Code as well. So it's got quite a good sort of global provenance, if I call it that. So it's definitely a good one to look at. Back to the UK, no, we don't have anything specific in the UK. I'm aware that many people have asked the PMCPA for specific guidance. They're saying that they will do something. They just need specific questions. And then they love to put out a Q&A or a guidance document. So all that I can say is watch this space. And at the moment, all we've got is that, you know, FPA badged one, which at least will get us part of the way there.
Okay. And again, a follow-up question. I'm sorry, I'm putting you slightly on the spot maybe with some of this, but, you know, and let's re-emphasize this is a consultation that's just completed. We haven't seen the final code, but in the course of that consultation, the COVID disruption has happened. What's your sense? Do you think there will be specific, has it had an effect on what's coming out of the consultation period? I'm trying not to put words in your mouth here, but, you know, what do you think? Have they taken on board during the consultation what's actually happening in real life, the disruption to events, the COVID type of issues? Or do you think there's an element of they've just carried on regardless, and because none of us quite know what's going to happen, sort of thing? And is that going to cause a problem in the new year because things are settling down into a very different sort of normal? Does that make sense?
Yeah, it's a great question. And you know what? I'm going to be slightly vague, and it's a tricky one to answer with total certainty. But I'm aware, again, if we just focus on the UK situation, that since the COVID stuff came in, there have been changes in some medicines legislation. I'm not an expert on it. There may be people online, but there's something about sort of emergency services around medicines. I've not read what the legislation is, but that is an example of something which has been pushed through UK government. We've got new laws there. And that will, I understand, be incorporated into the code when it comes out in January because of that new bit of legislation. So yes, even though we've not got maybe the virtual stuff, if there's local legislation that is being pushed through, then yeah, that will have to be adopted. So apologies, I'm not super knowledgeable on that yet. I've not unpicked it.
Okay, but these are the sorts of issues that people need to be thinking about a little bit, and so on. I think part of the purpose of this is to raise issues and discussion points and so on. Kay's made a couple of comments about the internet being global, and I guess that was following my point about going on from meetings. It's all virtual now. You can't actually give someone a cup of coffee now, so maybe that bit doesn't apply. But there are other aspects that will apply. Codes apply, but you already made the point. There's not a lot more in the new code about digital and virtual activity. Is that right?
Yes, that's right. And if I'm just sort of looking back at that virtual meetings guide, then they've put in a few suggestions in there in terms of, yeah, internet, online, obviously global. It's not just a case of taking the European meeting. You know, we no longer have a centre for that, and going forward, meetings was just start virtual, you know, with no code that you can label. This was going to be a German meeting, for example. But it's saying there just about making sure that, you know, delegates are not accessing information that they shouldn't be accessing in terms of, you know, licensed, unlicensed medicines. And if it happens to be on a promotional exhibition stand, then you've got to put in steps to make sure that you know who is accessing that information. But again, have a look at that if you think that applies to you, because there's some useful little bits and bobs in there.
Okay. I mean, it's a murky area, isn't it? And it's one, I mean, you know, I've been around the digital world for a long time, and it's one that everyone's always been worried about. And it's not really getting a lot clearer, is it? Let's follow Kay's question. You might just want to close this one down, and that's fine. Kay, let's quote Kay's question. A lot of EU companies use the ABPI as a reference code for global activities where FPA is a bit vague. What do you think is going to happen after Brexit? Have you any sense of what might happen? And let's not get too bogged down in this.
Yeah, right. Right, I'm going to be really, really bold here. I don't think it's going to change much.
Right.
The ABPI, the PMCPA are still part of FPA. Nothing would change post Brexit, so I'm not seeing this code disappear. No.
Okay.
No.
Maybe there's an important point in there that. Yeah. But maybe there's an important point in there. The UK isn't dropping out of FPA because of the EU shenanigans. Yeah. Okay.
No. And actually, what they say is that FPA is all about Europe. And if we look at the geography, we're still in Europe, even
Exactly,
if we're not, you know, entrenched in the, you know, the EU, you know, legislation and the Parliament and stuff. But no, we're not suddenly walking away from codes of practice. So don't start celebrating yet, is what I would say.
Okay. Let's just have a. I'd like to get into that question that's up there, but let's take anonymous is ours. Okay, so it's anonymous. There won't be a grace period, you said. So starting from the 1st of July. Data should be collected for disclosure. So will the collect of these kind of have to start from 01/22? I think he's looking for the timing here. Transfer of values to patient organizations, patients. If the code comes out in late January, you have to start in 01/07. When are you collecting the data from? Does that make sense? I think it's a very specific question, but a timetable question, which is quite important, I think, in terms of what you do when.
Yeah, it's a really good question. So I think, first of all, remember that loads of collecting of that transfer of disclosure information is happening currently. So ORDMs, healthcare professionals, patient organisations, it's going down a slightly different direction, but you're still collecting that information. So that big new one is the patients, the journalists and things. And so the code is at the moment saying, and I've not heard anything via the grapevine to know that it's going to change, is they're saying that companies will collect that data starting 2022.
Okay.
And so the first disclosure will be at the end of 2022. And that will be...
So just to be picky, but it's from the beginning of 2022. So 01/01/22 sort of thing is the expectation.
Yeah, I'm just going to absolutely just grab my draft. Just bear with me. See if I can absolutely pull it out, or we can get back to people.
Don't worry. I mean, at the end of the day, don't worry too much, because you know that this is a consultation.
But it's start collecting from the 1st of January 2022.
Okay, that's cool. That's clear. That's clear. Okay, just out of interest, again, pinning you down and being bold. You were careful to say this is aggregated data on an annual basis.
Yes.
But I think I might sit there and think, if I was one of those journalists or patients, where's this going? If not now, where's it going in the future? And the tax implications or something like that. Just, you know, have you any sense, would you be bold enough to predict, you know, could it go further? Or is there going to be a fairly sort of, it's got to be aggregate because But you understand what I'm asking.
I
Similar
do.
thing to the physicians. What's that
Yeah.
going to do to my tax
Yeah.
position?
Yeah, I mean, there's a huge driver from the whole of industry. So this is not UK. This is coming down from the IFPMA, from FPA as well, that what companies need to be thinking about is that really we just try and disclose everything. It's not what do we disclose, it's, when do we disclose. So there is that sort of basic principle which is coming through. In the UK, there was discussion a year or so ago as to whether it would actually be mandated in law, like it is in some other, countries. But the government has not yet, put that through. If I'm slightly cheeky, they've probably been a little busy with Brexit, and now, of course, with the pandemic going on and things. But it is there on the back burner that if people don't agree to have their details disclosed, so this will be a healthcare professional and have that disclosed on a name basis, then they may well step in and toughen up on and mandate that. But I've not heard anything, on the grapevine say that is imminent coming through.
Okay.
If there is a
But
warning.
there's a clear question mark or I assume people still have clear question marks in their head about what that does for a personal taxation situation, sort of thing, and the threat sort of thing. Okay, well, I'd like to pick up on this question, which has come in earlier on, but it's picking up on the contracted services and so on, and the agencies. Again, this is slightly a bit of an ongoing sort of discussion, I suppose, but let's just take it to the extreme of a freelancer. A freelancer working for an agency, working for a company, and the rules are very clear that you're extending to everybody involved that responsibility. And you're saying, companies are going to come in and ask about training of the agency, but how far does that go? Do you then go, and we need to know all your freelancers are trained, your writers, your whatever? How are you dealing with that? How's that going to be? Do you see what I mean? So to take it all the way to, and there's someone online, freelancers who are sitting there, do you think there's going to be any implications that far down the line, and what sort of implications? Does that make sense? Can you answer that one?
Yes, it makes sense completely. So if we take the word of the code, then the pharmaceutical company is always responsible for any contracted third party, organizations. And so, as we've seen from that big list, it would include those who are subcontracted down that cascade. So I know that some agencies out there already have this on their radar, and they say, right, even if you're a contractor, then yes, we need to make sure you're trained on the code. So they will include those in their own in-house training sessions. That's the majority, but some might be tough and say, well, actually, we need proof from you that you've been trained in codes. So there is that obligation there. And if I think back to some of the code cases which have come through in the UK and has ended up as a breach, sometimes it has literally been pharma company has subcontracted to an agency who
Exactly.
to a production agency, to a film agency, to an actor. The actor messed up and the company gets the breach. So
Exactly.
they will unpick that cascade, and they will want to know that people have been, knowledgeable about this document.
Exactly. Which again might be more of a threat in theory than in practice, but there's a real focus on that sort of activity, which I think people should know about. A couple of questions have just popped in. Let's just wrap this up with the final question, which makes some sense. Is there going to be a change to who can certify materials? Is there any change there for the same people involved?
Okay, so I've not covered that one. The answer is yes, sort of.
Okay. I was expecting you to say no. Okay, go on then.
Yeah. So they've added in a little bit of clarification as to what the medic qualification is. But if we look at it broadly, then we've still got the idea that you have that final signatory who is going to be a medic or a pharmacist in the UK. You've then got somebody else who is called an appropriately qualified person, and they're changing that to an AQP signatory, trying to make it a bit clearer. So they may be involved in maybe the overseas meetings, looking at that type of thing. And then we've just got this term, just a general AQP, who might be somebody who can then sort of examine materials. So in a nutshell, not much change, but again, it's just a bit of a terminology change, is what I would say.
And again, maybe the devil's in the detail a little bit. Okay, right. As I said, I've got one eye on the clock, and I do like to finish the recording part of this session around about now.
I've
Sorry,
just
go on. Yeah.
checked that timing, if I just may. So for the disclosure, for the contracted services to patients and the public, Then it's saying the information, it must be publicly disclosed annually in respect of transfer of values made in 2022 and each calendar year thereafter. So it's literally start your clock 1st of January 2022, and then that's looking like what they're saying at the moment. So I just
Excellent.
wanted to clarify that.
Okay, so we've got certainty on that. Okay, thank you very much. I'm going to wrap this up now. Big thanks to the audience, but don't run away because, as always, we've got 10 minutes or so to keep talking, and there's quite a few questions and comments have come in which we can address. For the purposes of the recording, I'd like to say a huge thanks to Jayne. Jayne, I know that you're very happy for people to contact you via LinkedIn is the obvious way of doing that. For those of you who haven't been involved in these before, as I said at the beginning, I think, if you want to be involved in these sorts of MedComms activities, everything you'll find at medcommsnetworking.com. You'll find there's Wednesday webinars going on about all sorts of topics. We'd love to have you involved. Please do have a look. All being well, but I always say all being well, but I think it'll be fine. We'll have the video recording of this on NetworkPharma TV later on today. You'll find lots of videos of previous webinars on NetworkPharma TV. So there's lots of things to go and explore. And please, as always, let me know if you've got any questions about what we're doing. So thank you, Jayne. I'm going to stop the recording now, and we do this little thing now, which we always do, which is we give a little wave. So bye-bye, and thank you very much. Cheers.